Recently, I made a video talking about what we might term the prehistory of the London Overground. But because it's such a big subject, there were several parts that I had to skip over, including the subject of today's video. A short-lived service, but one that ended up having quite a big impact. As a matter of fact, I would argue that it's one of the direct ancestors of the Overground, and the Docklands Light Railway. Today we're talking about the Crosstown Linkline. The Crosstown Linkline did not last very long at all, a smidgen under 6 years. It was a rail service from Camden Road in North London to North Woolwich in East London. It started on the 14th of May 1979. The basic concept was this. In the 1970s, East London was not doing well. The docks, which had been at the heart of the community, were winding down. By 1979 they were barely hanging on. The government was aware of the issue, but attempts to revitalise the area were going nowhere. Attempts at large-scale redevelopment just kept stalling. And one of the biggest issues was transport. This was long before the Jubilee Line extension or the Elizabeth Line, and the Docklands Light Railway wouldn't come along until 1987. What there was a number of poorly served and disused railway lines, primarily intended for freight services, that were ever decreasing in number. But the Greater London Council had some ideas. The old North London line had a branch off at Dalston, which ran through Hackney to Stratford. There was also a line from Stratford connecting to the North Woolwich branch. Neither of these rail links had been used for passenger trains since the 1940s, but combined, they offered the potential for an 11-mile rail service through some of the worst-served parts of London. So the GLC went to British Rail, offering to fund this. The full service was planned to run from Camden Road to North Woolwich. Camden Road was picked as the northern terminus because it had spare track where trains could be stored. North Woolwich was picked as the eastern terminus because otherwise the trains would have to run into the river. The route would incorporate a number of new stations. Well, I say new, it's a bit more complicated than that. West Ham already existed, but it was added to the Crosstown Link Line on the day the service started to give interchange with the Underground District Line and the main line into Fenchurch Street. In May 1980, two more stations opened, Hackney Central and Hackney Wick. Hackney Central was on the site of a closed station, and Hackney Wick was near another closed station, Victoria Park. Canning Town, Custom House, Silvertown and North Woolwich were all modernised. The general architectural style might be described as, we want to upgrade these stations, but our budget is whatever we can find down the back of the sofa cushions. Similarly low budget were the trains themselves. Much of the route was unelectrified, so Class 105 diesel multiple units were brought in. These were 20 years old at the time and were being withdrawn from service elsewhere on the network. Now, to be fair, 20 years old is not that old by modern standards. There are intense commuter services in London today being worked by units that are 40 or even 50 years old. But these ones were not in good condition, which would become apparent when the service began. There was much fanfare when services started, with a grand opening and fancy new branding. But the service was much criticised. In theory, it ran every half hour, every 20 minutes during rush hour. But in practice, trains were often delayed by having to give way to freight services and other passenger trains on the North London line. The trains often broke down, increasing the intervals. What was more, they were noisy and uncomfortable. Staff shortages could also result in cancellations. And even when everything was running exactly as it should be, trains operated only from Monday to Friday. Which is odd because the publicity leaflets advertised days out in the countryside and at the beach, which is not really practical when you have to go into work. Other criticisms were that the stations were poorly sited, that the service was badly publicised, and that the ticketing arrangements were rubbish. There were even those who argued that the service shouldn't exist at all, their complaint being that there was nothing in the Docklands that was worth connecting, which seems rather to be missing the point, but there we go. Regardless of the service's shortcomings, British Rail and the GLC evidently didn't consider it a total failure. Another station, Dalston Kingsland, joined the route in 1983, again on the site of a closed station. And by this time, BR were looking at further upgrades, with more financial assistance from the GLC. They planned to electrify the whole line, enabling trains to run all the way from Richmond in West London to North Woolwich. This would be known as the North London Link. Another new station, Homerton, would join the route. All this would mean the end of the Crosstown Linkline, and the service finished on the 11th of May 1985. 2 days later, the North London Link would begin running. The Crosstown Linkline did not last very long, but I would argue that it had an impact on rail services in London that can be felt all the way up to the present. It proved that there was new life in old lines, which would give rise to the Docklands Light Railway and the Overground. In fact, both of these systems actually use part of the Linkline route, along with the stations opened for it. The opening of the North London Link would result in the withdrawal of North London Line services to Broad Street, which would hasten that station's closure and, in turn, free up the line running into it for later use by the Overground. And perhaps most importantly of all, it demonstrated the lesson that governments still have trouble wrapping their heads around. Upgraded public transport brings in passengers. Well, I hope you enjoyed today's video. If so, please do leave a like and perhaps subscribe for more. I would like as ever to thank my donors on Ko-fi, on Patreon and here on YouTube for your kind support. You are the passenger service to my freight-only line. And I hope I will see you all again very soon. Cheerio.